And we're back. Welcome to Abstractable. I'm Ryan, and with me is Lachie. The Abstractable Podcast is for curious people who want to learn. We dig into our favourite thinkers and uncover what to take away from their ideas. In this episode, we talk about Michael Jordan, The Life by Roland Lazenby.
And what do we discuss? So we talked about how Jordan revolutionised basketball both on and off the court. We also talk about how to get a star player to be a team player and how Phil Jackson did this. We also take a trip inside the mind of the most competitive person on the planet. And why? Well, to learn about Jordan is to understand how to be a master. And because everyone loves learning about Jordan, let's be honest. So if you haven't been watching the Netflix doco, you can find out a bit about Jordan on that. It's called The Last Dance. Also, Jordan Rides the Bus is a great insight into his life, which is an ESPN documentary. And he's got pretty cool Twitter handle @Jumpman23. So check that out too. Don't forget you can find the full video from our episodes on YouTube and check out the show notes, including other books we mention for every episode through our Instagram page @The Abstractable. We hope you enjoy the episode. And we're back. How are you, Ryan?
Marvellous. Lachie, how are you?
Good, thanks. Good. I've got Jordan fever.
You're feeling it. You're feeling it in your bones.
Just like everyone else with a Netflix account.
Yeah, I think Netflix has outdone themselves yet again on this one.
Yeah, it's awesome. And today we're talking about Michael Jordan, but we've got something a little bit extra to bring because we've read a book about him previously, so we thought we'd record an episode about the great man, but talk about the biography by Roland Lazenby. What's the guy's name? Roland
Lazenby.
I sluggishly said his last name.
Yeah, I heard that. It's just Lazenby. You thought you could get away with it too.
That's right.
So this is Michael Jordan, The Life by Roland Lazenby.
Such a good book.
Yeah, it's a meaty book too. So just a mod of 650 pages, I think.
I know. I have to say I did read it in hard copy and it's a good paperweight, but it's pretty bloody interesting too. I found I really kept reading. It was probably the second only to Andre Agassi's biography in the sports department that I could say that I haven't been able to put it down as much.
Are you much of a basketball fan?
No, I'm not. I kind of feel with basketball, I don't want to start off on a negative foot, but I kind of feel
you're going to polarise half our audience now. I can't wait.
Yeah. Basketball is a couple of things I'll say. The first thing is the highlights of basketball are unlike anything else. They're fantastic. They're incredible. The dunks, the athleticism, the buzzer beaters. But I think that there's so many of those highlights because you could almost fast forward the game to the last 3 minutes because it's always like 82 to 78 and then they're slugging it out in those last couple of minutes. And I find the timeouts kind of play with the game flow a little bit for me. But
they're probably taking from the because you've watched like American football where that's very much like set up the play and go. And this is exactly what we're running. So it's almost like they're bringing in elements of that, but it almost adds to the suspense, don't you find?
Well, yeah, I personally like it a bit more flowing, but it certainly adds to the highlights reel, I think. But
yeah. I've never been a big
are you a basketball fan?
Yeah, I've never been like a massive passionate follower, particularly of any team, but I love the sport. I think it's an awesome sport. It's one of those ones that doesn't attract people at the absolute spectator, premium level. It's a sport you can play like down at the local basketball court with a few friends or something. That's what I love about it.
Yeah, it's great fun. And 2-ball knockout is a fantastic game.
Are you king of the circle, mate?
Not at all. Not at all. The other thing with basketball I think is awesome is that this is something that Craig Hutchison talks a lot about on the Sounding Board podcast, that sports are kind of driven by stars, and basketball is a star-centric game because there's only 5 players on each team. So one person can really dominate, and that's super entertaining.
It's like this really fascinating blend between, because you've got like the superstar sports, which are the individual sports, you know, the tennis or the golfers and those type of things. Whereas this is an actual team sport, like 5 people is still a team, and you've still got the ability to have these absolute superstars basically run the entire team. But
it's something even more about that, I reckon. Like, you know, it makes the star even bigger, in my opinion.
Because they're standing out. Like, I love within the book, and I think it was about Horace, when Jordan and Horace were playing together, and he mentions that it wasn't until he made some remarkable play in their second championship run, and Horace had, you know, obviously came off for Horace in his shot or whatever he did, and then Jordan said after the game, he's like, "Yep, well, Horace hadn't earned his stripes, but he's now earned his stripes," or something like that. He's, you know, this already having won a championship player in the NBA has only just earned his stripes.
He's got a code.
And
yeah, that's something we'll talk about.
So do you want to tell me more about Jordan, right? And particularly the early life, because Netflix doesn't cover a great deal of that, or from what I've seen.
No. So the Netflix documentary we're referring to is The Last Dance, which is a 10-part series. If you haven't watched it, been under a rock somewhere, get out from under that rock and give it a watch and a listen, because it's pretty cool. But I suppose this book ties in nicely to that, because that kind of focuses somewhat on Jordan's life, but really around his Chicago Bull years mostly. And it also profiles more of his teammates, which provides some good context to his life and his success, but not everything. And I also think that it went a bit light on him when I watched the documentary. I kind of felt that it missed some of the more salacious, controversial parts of his life.
It's a big word.
As well. Wow. You're welcome. So, yeah, we'll kind of talk about a few of those too. So Michael Jeffrey Jordan, born February 17th, 1963 in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. To Dolores Peoples was her maiden name, but Dolores Jordan and James R. Jordan Sr. And so his mother worked in a bank, and his father was an equipment supervisor. But they quickly moved to Wilmington, North Carolina, where he grew up when he was a toddler. And so he's kind of part of a pretty large family. He's got 2 sisters and 2 brothers. Rosalind Jordan, Dolores Jordan, Larry, and James Jordan Jr. That's quite a good name. I like that. And yeah, I guess so. I suppose he went to school and had a hugely competitive kind of relationship with his brothers, and his father would kind of encourage that. And they played sports all through high school, baseball, basketball, etc. And yeah, he played football too. And something interesting about him was he was actually kind of a bit late to develop. So he tried out for the varsity basketball team during his sophomore year, but he wasn't tall enough. He was said to be too short to play at the level, and only his mate got in. And if you know anything about Jordan, I'm sure that fueled the fire. And so he went home that year and practiced every day basically. And then he went on to become a star in his later years in high school. And he had a bunch of 40-point games, and he grew, 10 centimetres over the following summer after he got rejected. And so he started to get attention from a lot of colleges and that sort of thing, and he was selected to play in the 1981 McDonald's All-American game where he scored 30 points. So he really started to establish himself as one of the really good younger players in the country at that point in time.
Yeah, certainly he had such a fascinating upbringing, right? And it goes back to this like deep heritage, which didn't just come, it's like a multi-generational heritage where they had a close upbringing even with his grandparents who lived across the road and were part of helping bring them up. So tied in with all that was this really tough, generations of moonshiners. And I can't remember what they used to call them, but people would like ferry things along the various the wetlands and rivers, and they got paid nothing. And it was real tough job. And so for them to get to the point of actually having a property was this real work ethic hadn't come through, and that kind of shone through the rest of the way in which they were brought up and the values they were brought up on, which was this, almost like this work hard, play hard mentality, which is very, very, very interesting. So those early years had a massive influence on him, no doubt.
Yeah, huge work ethic.
Yeah. And they also, Jordan's parents, they were quite humble, very, very reserved. And then when you look at, say, Jordan, who's this very, very outgoing, overly confident person, but he also had these virtues within him to, to focus on what was important and to focus on what he wanted to focus on. And I just find it so fascinating that he kind of broke out of this shell from being raised as being so humble and so reserved.
Yeah, it's kind of like he just had this, I guess at the start when you see him interviewed early days, he's pretty reserved, but you get him onto a basketball court and he has to be the alpha dog. In fact, in any competition, he will not want to lose. He's the most competitive person I've ever read about. So much so that, in college, they'd be having putting games in the corridor. And Jordan had never played golf before at that time. I think this is one of his college roommates in the book talks about how he'd beat him at putting and then he'd come back 2 days later and Jordan had practiced for hours and hours and hours so that he could be competitive in this sort of hallway game. And there's another interesting one in the documentary where they're throwing coins against the wall, trying to hit a patch of particular colour patch on the carpet, and you can see the competitiveness in him in that point. He just cannot have fun. In that instance, he must win. To him, that is fun, I guess.
Yeah, I think that is his fun.
Yeah.
Winning is where it gets fun for him.
Yeah.
And just seeing how far he can kind of push it and how hard he takes it is where he seems to see that there's the fun in it. I think Magic Johnson was noted as saying that he thought he was the most competitive person on the earth until he met Michael Jordan and he realised he was nowhere near it.
Yeah. There's some interesting insights into how he kind of motivates himself as well that we can get into. you a sports fan?
I'm not a massive like spectator of sports. No, so I'm not overly obsessed with any one team. I'm a Collingwood AFL supporter, which I think I've just polarised the other half of our audience now, which you've done for the basketball earlier.
There go 3/4 of our listeners.
Yep, gone.
So, thanks.
And I was not a fan. I was a fan of the Lakers in the NBA, but I think that was more of a bandwagoning more than anything else. So, but I love to watch. You know, just to you go.
That's cool. Yeah, because I don't actually think we've ever talked about sport out of so many conversations we've had.
What about you? By the way, mate.
Yeah, I'm a big sports fan. So it's like a big part of my life, mainly AFL. And I grew up playing team sports. So cricket, footy, soccer, a lot of soccer. And it's kind of played a big role in my life. And I follow the Richmond Tigers, but I follow them very strongly. Like, I'll watch football, you know, I'm not like crazy, but I care. I care about the outcome to the point where I'm very stressed before, during, and probably annoyed after the game. And I think it's just got to do with perhaps the way you're brought up. But
you sound like every other Tiger supporter.
Yeah. But I often find myself thinking, why do I care about this? You know? It doesn't make sense, but I do. So
it's belonging. You're belonging to a tribe.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, and fond family memories too, probably. I think so.
Well, you kind of join, you become baptized into the tribe of, say, Richmond or a football team or whatever the sport is local, most popular in your country or family, and you become baptized in, and that's your welcoming to the tribe. And what interests me is that quite often there'll be big divides in families just over sports teams. You might have one half of the family barracking for. So in our family, it's in AFL context, it's half of the family is Richmond and the other half is Collingwood, and so there's a massive,
that's tough,
and that's a big showdown, as you can imagine.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, exactly. And I guess sport, it's interesting. Like it can, in my mind, it teaches you a lot of things, but it also represents a lot of interesting social dynamics in the way people support it and the type of games we follow and what we care about in those games.
Yeah, and sport, like I said before that I wasn't a fan of sport. I like to play sports. I'm just not a massive spectator. So I used to love playing basketball, you know, back in school.
Yeah.
Wasn't any good at all, but loved being out on the court.
You can just do it, you know. It's fun.
Yeah.
You don't have to be amazing.
And so
I was trying to find the name of a book that I wanted to read, which I'll have to put in the show notes, that kind of talks about, you know, the different psychological meanings behind sport and what the different games represent and, you know, why we care so much about sportsmanship or different ways you act during sports games.
Well, it's our 20th, 21st century form of war, is it not?
It's got to be something to do with that, or there's a battle element or a hunting element to it.
Particularly when you watch Jordan, like you look at him and my mind just casts back to, like, you know, Russell Crowe in Gladiator or something. Just this guy that he's not going to lose. He's literally going to win no matter what happens.
Yeah, there's heroes, and there's also how you treat people is very important in sport. And I think that's got to do with teaching people about social etiquettes and the way to try and, live a life. I think it's kind of as deep as that.
So he had some pretty influential characters in his time at college too, mate, to influence him how to live his life.
Yeah, so he got offers from a bunch of colleges, including Duke, North, South Carolina, Syracuse, and Virginia. But in 1981, he took a basketball scholarship to the University of North Carolina, where he majored in cultural geography. I'm sure he spent a lot of time looking at that. But probably this biggest impact on his life at that time was Coach Dean Smith and the teachings that he had and this formative part of his career. And he taught him sort of this team-oriented system of playing, and no one was kind of bigger than the team sort of thing. There wasn't too much flashiness in the way they played, and it was very kind of, I suppose, I don't know, systemized. Maybe that's the word.
Yeah, it was all for one for all. It was all the team. It was the team is greater than anything else in here, and so much so that they were banned basically from dunking during basketball games. So if any player on the team dunked the ball, them and the rest of the team would be punished, or in a showy way. They still had dunks and things, but they were of the moment. But if it was like a big slam down for just for the excess of having a slam down, Dean Smith didn't agree with that. So they would be punished, and then the player would have to report to him in his office and explain why he did it. And so interesting.
It is, isn't it? And so he made the game-winning jump shot in the 82 championship game against Georgetown, where Patrick Ewing, who he'd faced later in his career, was playing. And he said that was the first major turning point in his basketball career. So I believe this was the point where he said, I became Michael Jordan, not Mike Jordan.
This is the shot, yeah?
Yeah. Like, I think this is where he really started believing he could do anything, And so he won a bunch of awards, Player of the Year awards, the Naismith and the like, and he decided to leave college 1 year early than his scheduled graduation and enter the 1984 NBA draft. And so the Bulls actually selected him third.
Oh, just jumping in there, mate. You're talking about Dean Smith, right? And the team. Dean Smith was also very rare to let players try and seek out NBA or join the NBA until they were ready. And it was only once the player had become bigger than the system where he would go, all right, he put them in this guy is well and truly ready. He's grown bigger than the system itself. And then he would go out of his way to try and scout out the best and possible options for them.
Yeah, that's really interesting because he really was a mentor to Jordan, and Jordan really loved him as like a second father almost. And I think during his career he went back and sought guidance from him at times.
Yeah, absolutely. And he always even a decade on when he was this one of the biggest people in the world essentially, certainly on the sports stage, he would still think back on Dean Smith, or how would Dean Smith look at me in this particular situation, or because Dean Smith placed a big focus on defense rather than offense, or more weight towards defense. If Dean Smith was in the crowd or he knew Dean Smith was watching the game, he would focus on his defense and stop focusing on his offense as much that game. And so you'd have a low-scoring Jordan game, but his defense would be solid.
Well, he won Defensive Player of the Year a few times. And so he was certainly an all-rounder. And so after deciding to leave college, he signed a deal with Nike. And so I think this is around the time David Falk came in, who gets a much bigger run in the book than in the documentary. And this guy actually had a huge influence on Jordan's life. And Nike threw everything at him. And you can read more about this in Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, which is an excellent book that we'll do here as well. And there's some other touch points we'll litter throughout where you can kind of find other references to Jordan as well. And another one here I would recommend is Abstract on there's a Netflix series called Abstract, and in season 1 they interview the shoe designer who worked a lot with Jordan, and it's a kind of a really interesting insight into how they designed a lot of his signature shoes too.
You get the full ecosystem, eh?
Yeah, but they offered him a huge deal for the time, which is nothing now, but what a smart thing.
Yeah, but it was pushed by so what's his name? Carl?
Well, David Falk is his agent.
Yes. And
I think that on the other side there was sort of a representative from Nike that was kind of pushing it too. And anyway, they reckon he earns about $40 million from endorsements every year, even now. And obviously Air Jordans launched Nike into a different stratosphere.
Yeah. Because that guy, the representative over at Nike, it was Carl. He basically laid his entire job on the line and said, because what they did prior to Jordan, the situation with Jordan is they might have a $2 million pool, for example, of money, and they would kind of disperse it amongst all the various college players coming through to the NBA or those sitting in college. Whereas he just said he somehow convinced, or even I don't even think he convinced Phil Knight. I think he just went and did it without even proper approval and put the $2 million straight into Jordan and said, we've got to do this. We've got to back him. This guy's going to change everything. And so this started to actually change the entire ecosystem of how sports players would be backed and how the brands would be perceived. You know, the superstars representing the brands rather than, you know, getting as many touch points out into the ecosystem as what the previous approach was.
Star power.
Yeah.
They could see something, couldn't they?
But it's what led them to, you know, making just a shoe just solely dedicated to Jordan. You know, the Air Jordans. And now people just walk around today and say, you know, I'm just going to go get a set of Jordans on the weekend. But that has a long, long history of where it came from, and it's incredible.
It's genius, at least in hindsight, anyhow. So he had a lot of backers. You know, he had some help along the way that people believed in him and kind of pushed him along, right? His father was a massive influence on him, but even beyond that, probably people took him up and lifted him up with them.
There was, particularly going through college, that you have those little ghosts that sit in the stands and, you know, follow people around and whatever. And so there's one, I think it was Garfinkel, and he named him, you know, this is as he was coming into the end of his college time, was naming him the top 10 national prospects in high school. I think it's Brett Enninger. He said he's second best in nationally player, and Bob Gibbons actually saying that he was the best player nationally, which is like...
yeah, but you would have to say it was close at the time. He wasn't Jordan as we knew Jordan. He had a lot of more improvement to go, you know. I think throughout his career he was a late bloomer physically, I think, even at this point, because he really accelerated once he got to the NBA.
So then he joined the Bulls.
He did. So he joined the Bulls, and look, he started strong. like in his rookie year, he averaged like 28 points, and he took the team from winning 35% of the games in the previous 3 seasons to playoff contenders. So as soon as he turned up to preseason, his energy just stood people up, you know, and it was clear he was the best player on the team after like the first 3, you know, preseason sessions. And people were just starting to say, hey, something special's happening here. And yeah, I guess it's kind of where he really starts fitting in with the Bulls, and where Jerry Krause starts to build a team around him, who's the general manager of the Bulls.
I noticed that I've only seen half of the episodes in the Netflix series. It's just a confession, but they seem to glaze over that.
You're absolved.
Yeah, I've lost my all right to talk about this.
No, you've read a book. It counts.
They seem to glaze over the NBA draft piece, and it sort of just looks like it just came out, you know, that the Chicago Bulls had decided then and there, no one else knew about it, that they were going to pick Jordan. Whereas there's all these like massive amounts of negotiation going on in the background, which was primarily led by his mum. And so she was like negotiating on his behalf quite strongly to ensure that he got the best possible deal. And one of those parts of the deal was, I think, something that allowed the Nike deal to come off in the way that it did, because there was some restrictions in typical deals that didn't allow players to do that. It also meant that he had like a longer term contract, which is where he became known as not getting paid much through the NBA. Sure, yeah. That's correct, but he was paid for everything else outside of the NBA.
But this kind of goes back to his code, and there's been a few points where that's kind of sticking out, you know, like he never tried to really renegotiate that deal. All throughout the book, he stuck to that deal and honoured it. And I think for him, a deal's a deal, you know? And he made that deal, and it was on him to go out and absolutely dominate as much as he could for that deal, you know, because that's what was agreed with Reisdorf.
Yeah, although Reisdorf was like renowned for never, ever renegotiating a deal.
Which is probably not a bad stand given the amount of, I suppose, money that's involved in these things. And, you know, I think Jordan was pretty pissed off at Scottie Pippen when he kind of took this kind of action against them and said, well, look, you signed this deal. Yeah, you're not getting paid much, but we've got a job to do here. And it's really interesting that he was able to be coached. I still find that quite fascinating because he's such an outsized, driven person, individual, you know, that he was able to kind of be taught by people. He didn't think he was so big that he was bigger than the coaches and the staff like Dean Smith and Phil Jackson and Doug and all those guys that he was coached by. He seems to still be able to be coached and to listen to authority in some senses. But then he was such a hard teammate and a bully to his teammates and would like get in fights with them and
do you want to talk more about the bullying?
The first year kids well, I mean, it goes into a bit of detail about some of the ways he made people uncomfortable, but he'd test you out, you know. So you'd come to training, and this is when he was like Michael Jordan, you know, the real deal, the best player to ever live. You'd come to training and he'd pick on you first session. So he'd see you out, you're playing your team, your practice matches or whatever, and he would just try and humiliate you until he got a rise out of you. And if you rose to him and said, fuck off, Michael, or whatever, and stood up to him, he'd be like, all right, I respect you now, right? He wanted to see if you had any fight in you.
He'd only respect you if you could play well and you did that.
Sorry. If you were useless, just get stuffed, And his way of being teammate was to just intimidate others into being better. And so there's this constant dynamic of they're all terrified of him and kind of hate him. But he's such a god on the field or on the court that they can't help but kind of love him for what he's doing. You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of feeling I got. None of them would kind of come outright and say it in the book or in the documentary, except for in the book, The Jordan Rules, where a few of the players, like Horace Grant, I believe, is alleged to have leaked a lot of stuff to the media about Jordan beating up teammates and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just a super weird dynamic that he's so aggressive with his teammates, but it's kind of got some kind of weird respect for certain rules and things.
Yeah, there's a real, I don't know how you describe it, but the culture of the team was very much, it was like a battleground. It wasn't this. It wasn't this. Like we often reminisce on our days of, say, playing sport when you grow up, and you've got the camaraderie with mates and different things. This just seems like the absolute opposite of that, particularly in trainings and things, where it's like his idea was to push them as far as they could possibly go, find out their weaknesses, and then push them on their weaknesses until they arced up, basically. And because he wanted to find out whether they would be there for him at the toughest of moments. Did they care like he did? Yeah. Were they as committed as he was?
Mm. Were they all in?
Yeah.
And that was kind of his code. He's like, well, if you can do that, then I've got you, And like that would, so if you were kind of passed his test, you were in. But he was uncomfortable. Like he just hated to lose. So like this reminded me of the book Leading by Alex Ferguson. Is that he was quite similar. He would be filthy after losses, So much so that, he couldn't talk to people for days and stuff. Like, so I think that others someone so powerful in a team that gets that upset, you kind of just want to avoid that at all costs,
Which I think was part of what he was trying to weed out, if anything, which to some degree did work. There were many players that just didn't make it in the team, unfortunately. But then you have the, players like Pippen who would kind of step up to the challenge of that and just themselves transform into this, or into almost like a similar, very much a similar type person, and just be remarkable players.
Yeah, he didn't really care about being liked as long as it rose everyone up,
Yeah.
So in the NBA, on his first year, he appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and I think a few people like Isaiah Thomas, Jordan was named in the All-Star game, and they felt he was a bit big for his boots, and so they basically freezed him out during the game, and they wouldn't pass to him and things like this, or at least that was his impression.
It's because he's wearing like a full tracksuit with like big gold chains and all these other things. And they thought it was a little bit too showy.
Big dog. And so, but he got his payback when he freezed Isaiah out of the Olympics team later in his career. So he never forgets any slight disrespect that even if it's not, even if he just feels it was, you're dead to him and you'll get yours.
You'll feel the wrath, the Jordan wrath come in.
Yeah. And it's his fuel. And anyhow, they also lost it his second year to the Pistons in the playoffs. So he broke his foot as well in the second season that he played and missed 62 games. And he was absolutely chomping to get back. Where they'd agreed game time that he could play, but he just said, stuff it one day and just did it anyway.
Well, this is the thing. It was like it was a 10% chance that he was going to re-break his ankle at the time, or sorry, his foot at the time that he wanted to come in. And it was a 10% chance he was going to re-break, and if the re-break occurred, he was going to end his career. And he was basically of the opinion, fuck it, I want in. And the way he looked at it, it was like, well, there's a 90% chance that I'm not going to break my ankle. And if we're going to take the insights from, say, the Black Swan or Nassim Taleb, it's probably a pretty poor decision to make because of the because of the tail risk.
Absolutely. But he did it anyway, and he scored 62 points in one game when he came back against the Celtics in the playoffs where Larry Bird was playing, another great player. So, but he listened. He listened, right? He actually listened to, because he had a 7-minute curfew put on him per half, I think, and it was in one of these games that was on. It was point in point. It was down to the last score. There was 30 seconds left on the clock. Jordan's timer had come off. They subbed him out. And he actually, for him to actually go off without making, he looked fuming, but without making any complaints and, kind of following orders is remarkable, I thought. Yeah, I agree. But I guess this is where things really started to get tense between him and Jerry Krause. And the upper management of the Bulls, and this kind of, this hatred for Jerry, and he became one of Jordan's enemies. And there's a really interesting yin and yang between these two guys, because Jerry was also a very strong character who was trying to build a team, and Jordan thought he knew everything his way, but I believe that without them both pulling hard and kind of hating each other, you wouldn't have got this greatness around him, because I think at this time, as they were losing in the playoffs, Jordan was starting to realise that he needed to have a great team around him. He couldn't just win it himself, at least not yet.
So what do you think about Krause? What's your take on him, Lockie?
I think he was probably a bit of an asshole. But I think he was perfect for the job. And I think he kind of is a bit of an easy target because, the great teams, and you see this in AFL too, they move great players on for the better of the team and it lasts longer. And he definitely, he didn't do that with Michael, obviously, because that would be complete madness, but he did kind of switch the players up around him and was looking to, make smart decisions for the long term, I think.
Yeah.
What do you think?
He was focused on getting, the perfect mix together, but not just the perfect mix for now, the perfect mix that we can then sustain, which is where this big debacle came in about rebuilding, breaking the entire team up and rebuilding it, because they were all these star players were starting to come towards, potential retiring ages.
Yeah, and you could see at the end of the Netflix documentary, The Last Dance, where, Jordan, he's won 6 championships. He's the best player that's ever lived. And you can tell he's so dirty about he's like, we could have won 7, They broke the team up. You could have won 7, he's still filthy about that.
But the issue with Jordan is he would have done that at 7. He would have said, we could have won 8.
Yeah.
I'm sure it would have just kept going.
Yeah, that's right. So, so it was sort of 87-88 he lost to the Pistons. And, I think that's when they sort of changed coaches. And this is around the time that someone Jerry Krause had brought in, Tex Winter, who had been with the previous coach, Doug Collins, and Jerry's been saying, use Tex's basketball offense, And anyway, he sort of saw Phil and brought Phil in as an assistant coach, then gave him the coaching role and said, you can coach, but listen to this bloke. And this guy, Tex Winter, had come up with this triangle offense. And it's kind of touched on in the doco, but it goes into detail about it in the book, that this was a really kind of old school but super effective and revolutionary way to kind of set the players up on the field.
Yeah, we are not going to analyse the triangle, but
just put a line through it there. I sort of started and I was like,
yeah, I heard you.
Dangerous territory.
I heard you clawing us into a early grave there, mate. So basically they all line up on the field in this, and so you move in a particular way, so there's always two passes. So you've always got a few options of where to pass the ball. So you're forming the shape of a triangle, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Good. It's good to know. So what
I'll draw a diagram.
Yeah, you get us up on the blackboard, mate. You can take us through a couple of triangle plays. So the really exciting thing about this was bringing in Jackson was like another level up to this team. So the way that Collins had coached, which was the previous coach before Jackson, was pretty well get Michael with the ball. Yeah, it's like feed. How do we clear out the rest of the team so that Michael can have the ball, so that Michael can do his thing. Whereas this was more of a team centric approach, and that was like, it was almost like, how do we get this star player to fit within this team centric mold? And I don't think anyone else could have done it other than Jackson and his approach.
It's the perfect balance, wasn't it?
Yeah. But it did bring up a really interesting thought for me, because it's like this. It's this constant balance, particularly in these type of games, between, is it the individual that's kind of winning this team, winning for this team or making this team shine, or is it the team itself? And I just can't imagine how a coach kind of balances that, particularly with a superstar on the team, and how much kind of rope you give and how much you need to pull back in letting it happen. Because the fact is, the impact that Jordan had on the ecosystem of basketball is, it's never happened previously. It's just such a huge change. Not just from him playing as an individual, but the sport, the branding, the Nike partnership, everything else around it, and the amount of change that's happened. You look at, say, Zuckerberg in social media, or Gates and Jobs in PCs, or Coco Chanel, Oprah, all those guys, just absolute game changers in their industries and ecosystems. And you wonder if they'd been constrained or hadn't been given enough rope or hadn't been given enough chance, like, where would that industry be now, or where would that all be sitting?
Yeah. He practiced all these mindfulness kind of practices before it was cool, and he let the players be individuals and treated them all slightly differently, which that's hard, And then how do you keep the cohesion?
He was a psychologist. And Jordan was like, particularly when Jordan was making some of the the politically charged decisions or tougher, he's going through some of the tougher times, he'd be like, I don't want to talk to Phil because Phil will get in my mind. He's the psychologist. He'll sort me out. I don't want that to happen. I want to stick with my decision.
Well, he's written a book called 11 Rings, which I think we should put on our list. It's on my to-read list on Goodreads. So I think we need to crack into that because this guy's a fantastic leader.
He is.
And went on to success with other teams. He
has had some controversy in his past, but he's also, as you said, he brought in the early 90s or whatever, late 80s, this mindfulness and Zen practices and a lot of Native American Indian practices in what they did. Like you'd beat a drum, just beating a drum before the game to get their heart rates kind of in sync and going together, and it was crazy.
That's
I think
awesome.
there was
get you really fired up, wouldn't it?
Yeah. You can imagine that. You can feel how much that would get the team going, particularly in this quiet little huddle just before the game, and he's playing the drums, getting them all amped up. Nothing quite like a pep talk like that. And then 30 years on, other organisations are now starting to tuck into the mindfulness and meditation practices that he was doing back then with his team.
Well ahead. So it was around this time that he actually got married too, to Juanita Vanoy in September 89. So they got 2 sons, Jeffrey and Marcus, and a daughter, Jasmine, together. So their relationship lasted quite a long time, but they started they filed for divorce in 2002, then reconciled, and then in 2006 they finally did split, and they had a record settlement at the time to split all of the money that they had as a family. So he didn't seem like too much of a family man. He's pretty focused on his career.
What I got was if it wasn't basketball, he was flying around in his jet to different golf courses or gambling.
Yes.
There was these glistenings that he really loved his family and whatever, but it just didn't seem like he was ever with them.
Yeah, that's right. It was, I think that's a good summary. So you'd sometimes see his kids at the games, but really that was about it. But this is kind of leading into that first, season where he really hits his straps. So 91 to 93 was they achieved their first 3 titles in a row under Phil Jackson, and Jordan won his second MVP. They beat the Lakers to claim their first victory in 91. In 92, they basically only lost 15 games. Jordan was named the finals MVP for the second year in a row. They took it out. In 93, he was beaten by Barkley to the MVP, but they beat them in the playoffs. They beat Barkley and the Suns in the playoffs that year. So, but this is kind of where, so Michael had this really clean image and really because he was a really flawless media performer, really. And really none of his kind of darker side had really come to the public. And then there was a book written by, it was called The Jordan Rules. It was published in 92. And it became it sort of talked about some of his gambling issues, where he'd gamble on the golf course for thousands and thousands of dollars, or in these card games with friends and stuff like that. Mm. And he owed people money, and he'd go to casinos and, blow 70 grand on the table sort of thing. But then also the way he treated his teammates. And this was probably a shock to the public, to see that kind of the darker side of his.
The golden child.
Yeah, the golden child. So it made me kind of think about, when you see him, the rage he had. Mm. I would call it rage. I would call it beyond anger. Just the way that he used it to fuel his fire, Any slight of him any small thing if someone walked past him and said, "Nice game, Michael," then he'd be like, "Well, I'm getting you. If Charles Barkley won the MVP, then I'm going to take him down because I'm the best," And he got this us versus them mentality going.
Yeah, every single thing that came his way, particularly from a challenging nature, was just him ready to go and have another leap and just jump into it and push it to another level yet again.
And it was like, I need to show this person, I need to, that was his attitude. It wasn't, I need to do this for me, or it was like, I'm going to get mine and show you, And he sort of fueled up that way, but he also obviously had an incredible inner drive. But yeah, it was kind of an interesting insight into his mindset.
Yeah,
something we should.
I was going to say, mate, he actually seems. It could almost be like a positive thing. It's like that any publicity is good publicity, or in the sense that it's like, oh, this guy that, because a lot of players got caught up with drugs or they got caught up with partying and different things. Whereas for Jordan, that hadn't ever been something he'd got involved with because he was just so focused on his A game. And
wouldn't touch it.
Yeah. And this was almost like, oh, that guy is real. He is actually a human. Sorry, we've completely forgotten, got caught up in the fact that we thought he was a god.
Yeah, I think it would have been hard for his teammates to see his glistening public image while he's beating them down at training. But I think something we haven't really touched on is how hard he practiced. He was the hardest trainer. He never, ever took a backward step. He practiced as hard as he played,
Yeah, I think in kind of passing through all of his upbringing, all of his high school life, all of his college days, all of his NBA, his entire NBA career, we've kind of glazed over the fact of just his absolute commitment. It was like which seemed to start out with his, I think, really start out with his brother, which we touched on going back, and he had this very, very fierce rivalry with his older brother on their home basketball court, or sorry, one of the basketball courts near their home. And that wasn't just a challenge for it wasn't just a challenge to try and be the best player. It was also a challenge to try and earn their father's love, because his older brother was seen as, he wasn't just good at sport and at that point in time better than Michael at basketball. He was also like a handyman, whereas Jordan, I think it's like his father said, pass me a Phillips head screwdriver and he'd pass you a set of pliers or something like that. And his father said, just go back inside. Yeah. Don't worry about it. And so I think there was this kind of gaping hole that Jordan was trying to fill with him, that kind of started really burning that big fire in him. And it trailed through to just how hard he trained, so much so that he would have teammates in high school, college, and in the NBA where they would finish up a training session. Everyone would be just drenched in sweat, can hardly walk. Jordan would come off and go, grab one of the players and said, we're playing a 1-1, let's go, or something like that,
Yeah.
And straight back into it.
It's insane. So talking about his father died around this time in kind of mysterious circumstances that, again, they kind of glaze over in the documentary. But his character is kind of called into question a little bit in the book.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, he is not a very good man. to be honest. He's seen on the public exterior, he's seen as being a very nice, reserved man, but he had drinking problems. There was child abuse involved with Sissy, I think. So he had a pretty tarnished past.
It was alleged,
yeah,
that he sexually abused his daughter, I think, but everyone else says it didn't happen. But it's out there. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's certainly a lot more of a shady past than what kind of on the show. And Jordan idolised him, as you would your father. But
yeah, there's definitely some big cracks in that past, mate. And whether you
have to feel for the sister, because the family basically disowned her, I believe.
Yeah, which is not good. In the book, it makes it pretty clear that it wasn't just allegations. It seemed like it was pretty well resolved, and they actually settled.
Yeah, okay.
There was some sort of settlement, I think, that occurred off the back of it.
My apologies. It's been a while since I've read it. So.
But yeah, well, I think in the doco, it's they did definitely glaze over it, and the impact of that. So, but again, it's a tough thing.
Yeah.
So
then that was the final straw for him. He ended up retiring, and they interestingly, they didn't push him too hard, but Reinsdorf kept a little bit of, connection with him by saying, come play for the White Sox, which I also own that team. So he quit and played baseball, and there's a great documentary, Jordan Rides the Bus, on ESPN 30 for 30, if you want to check it out, about that part of his life. And it's fascinating because he just kind of went back to his roots and trained really hard to become a baseball player, starting with the minor leagues. And, they say he could have had a major league start if he'd stayed at it and there wasn't a strike that kind of, sort of stopped the season when he was kind of hitting his straps. But really, I feel like it kind of played out how he needed to, and he recharged the batteries. But it's a fascinating part of stopping to then go forward again. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it was almost like baseball was the rest, and I don't think he needed a physical rest. He just needed a mental break, because
Correct.
There was just so much going on, and I can't just imagine being in this constant battleground with him. And I can't imagine he would have, certainly by how quickly he progressed in baseball, I can't imagine that he was too relaxed in his baseball sweats either. But it just seemed to be the space that he needed, and it got him away from some of the intensity and the limelight from the NBA cycle.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. The greatest player ever just stops mid-career. But I reckon it's a big part of what got him through the next part.
I agree.
Look, he won 3 more championships. He returned in 95 with the genius press release, just "I'm back." That was absolutely amazing bit of publicity there.
It's clearly where we got the intro to our podcast.
Yes. Good point. And yeah, he came back and just dominated. And this time Rodman was there, Phil was there, Pippen, Paxman, just the whole crew. Kukoc, and they just went on to just nail another 3.
Bringing the band back together, mate.
Yeah, and this is where he did some of his most inspirational work, carrying team on his back, and where he played smarter. He wasn't probably as athletic as he once was, but just a smart player who was able to just, he'd want the ball in those moments. That's the other thing. He took everything on.
Yeah, it was. What you'd find is there would be other players in situations, particularly for some of these make or break plays that had to happen, particularly in the final countdowns in games. And I know myself, like, just when you're playing sport, you're like, I do not want the ball here because the entire pressure of the game is going to now ride on me. And
me too.
And like, you're like, I just don't want to be near it. I don't want to be responsible for this. And there was actually, I think it was interviews with even other NBA players, and some of them just, they're just concerned they don't want the ball, or they don't want to have the shot or whatever. Whereas Jordan would basically be like, give me the ball. I want the ball. And we'll make it happen.
Yeah.
Which is where you see some of these, some of his like top 10 shots of all time, and the clutch moments of him making some of those shots is just incredible. But you can't imagine the pressure,
the athleticism.
But I think if he didn't
crazy.
have the confidence in himself, which came out as being arrogant or came out as being overly showy, if he didn't have that confidence, he wouldn't be able to pull that stuff off, because he wouldn't have the hunger for that ball as he did.
That's right. And he missed a bunch too.
Yeah, but he didn't care. Like him missing a bunch of shots, he would literally, that would be like water off the duck's back, and you'd focus on the next thing. There was a famous game, I think, where it was three-quarter time or something, and he'd had 20 shots or something and hit 5, and then there was concern coming from one of the coaches or something, and he said, "We'll be right, we'll get this." And he came out and then ended up scoring like 30 points or something in that
awesome.
in the final quarter. It's just ridiculous.
So after the NBA, he came back one more time. Couldn't help himself. And he was a part owner of the Washington Wizards, and then he came back and
he's like Johnny Farnham, mate. He just keeps retiring.
That's it. He just kicked one more time. But he was still dangerous, He'd score a lot when he was playing. He had limited game time. One game he scored 43 points in 2003. He was the first 40-year-old to do so in the NBA. Not a bad effort. And he spent a lot of his time raging on his teammates for their lack of focus and intensity. So, including the number 1 draft pick of the time, publicly just said they're not committed, Yeah. And then he retired. But post-retirement, he's just spent a heap of time playing golf. He was fired from the Wizards as sort of their back-end manager in 2003. But then since then, he's become a majority owner of what's now the Charlotte Bobcats.
Yeah, that was one of the big things for him, is because I think he had offers to, join other clubs and different things, but he wanted to have eventual controlling ownership of a team. That's what he's set his sights on. And so, the Bobcats became that for him.
So, reflections.
Oh, every time you finish an episode on this Netflix series, you're just so pumped up. You're like,
I know. I can't watch it at night. I think I've said that to you.
Do not watch it before you want to go to bed.
That's it.
But okay. So the scene in Indiana Jones and the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
Right? Where Indy's like, he's rolled up to that cliff. There's like the cliff and the other cliff. And there's this big hole in the middle. This is after he's, when he's coming towards the final room, almost in his trials and tribulations to the Holy Grail. And he kind of takes step onto the, he's got to like just step forward onto the bridge and make that leap, if you will, the leap of faith. I really likened that to what Jordan was doing, right? But instead of like, in Indy's case, he'd just kind of step 1 foot forward and just so happened that there was an invisible bridge there that they could proceed to, put some sand on. In Jordan's case, it's like he's taken this like leap off the cliff, and then he's landed. But as soon as he's landed, he's then taken another leap, and that to me seems like this commitment that he's got to what he's doing. Like him making that leap is going, I am all out there. I am totally committed to winning this thing. And so in making the leap that he makes, that's going, I'm 100% going to make sure we win this particular thing. And, sometimes they lose, but he's made the leap. And I feel like if he didn't have the confidence in himself, I don't think he would have landed. I don't think the other foot would have landed when he hit the other side.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of Arnold, where the bridge for him is his own self-belief in his ability, I think, is
yes.
that he kind of thought, I can do this, I'll push myself, I can do this. And he did. So he kept proving himself right, I guess.
Would you have wanted to have that commitment, right? Do you think it seems like a nice way to live?
No, not at all. I think it would be very difficult to be happy if you were him.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting the way he used the darker side of his personality to fuel him. I found that fascinating. I also found it really interesting how, I guess, his like fanatical commitment to practice was something that was very inspiring, and something I'd like to take away is that he practiced ferociously and always took the leap, like you said, and it just made him really good.
Yeah.
Coupled with his natural ability. I know I've said this in other episodes, but I'm always shocked by how hard these people work. I don't know why. I always sort of feel like, they must have just always been good, but it's not enough,
He's really set the bar for me, and I don't think I've ever encountered anyone like this. I don't know if you can think of anyone that's equivalent, because no. I don't even think Schwarzenegger is equivalent in terms of this absolute must-win dedication to what he's doing.
I feel like it's different from Schwarzenegger because Jordan's angry. Whereas I think Arnie's more joyful in the way he goes about it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. He's angry. He's angry in the moment though, because as soon as he comes off the field, and he said he leaves everything on the field, so they would have big rough ups on the field, and then he would come off and then be fine. Obviously, then you get into the training gym, you're back on the field, so that's you're back in the hate zone.
You wonder if it does leave. Yeah, you wonder if it does leave him though, because he's sort of thinking about that guy who walked past him at the restaurant and didn't talk to him, or I think that's true to a point, but the inner dialogue we'll never know. But
yeah,
he seemed kind of playful at times. Like he wasn't always that intense. He didn't carry around that intensity in his demeanor all the time, but I feel like there's always something there.
Yeah, I think he complemented the seriousness with his jovial, joking nature, and he'd always be just having this relentless banter with people, particularly his teammates off the field, just to keep the jive up. But I almost, I think it's almost like the way his personality is like constructed, he needs to have these like polarizing things because he's so extreme in one place. He needs to like counteract that with equally extreme in another place, to just make sure that it balances out and all works. Because as you mentioned, he had that, there's definite anger that comes about on the court, but needs to have that, you know, that humor and the banter and everything else off the court, and, you know, smoke cigars and play cards and things just to kind of relieve him.
And gamble.
Yeah.
As a stress release, I'd say. But wouldn't have been hard to be him. Would have been hard to be him, I mean. Oh, man.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't do that.
No.
Never say never, mate, hey?
That's it.
Got to keep motivated.
Well, on my bucket list is to dunk a
Really?
basketball once, but I'm not sure I think physically it's impossible.
I don't think it is.
But I did go to bounce that kids thing where it's like a bounce trampoline house. Have you seen that? It's like this warehouse full of trampolines, and one of them is the trampoline that goes up to a basketball ring. And so I got in there, boom, dunked a few basketballs.
Oh, you did it. I see you've done that.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Me and my friend were the only adult there.
I was going to say.
It was pretty embarrassing. It was pretty embarrassing, but I got to dunk. So
you were practicing the emotions, mate, for the real thing.
Yeah.
I want to hold you to the real thing. How tall are you? You're 5.
I'm just under 6 foot, probably 5'11" or something.
Yeah. I think you're within dunking height range, mate. So the only thing holding you back is you.
We'll see. We'll see, but stay tuned for that.
Yeah, we'll keep us posted, Lockie.
I will.
Good chat.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers.